could we maybe, and I don't know if one fight is enough to even start this conversation, but does it kind of make you start to think again in the back of your head about, hey, you know what? Maybe one day seeing George St-Pierre fight Conor McGregor isn't the craziest thing.
It'd be a huge pay-per-view, but man, I don't know. That's a lot of size.
Well, okay, so we've seen Conor fight at welterweight. Well, first of all, they have fight at welterweight, but we've seen Conor fight at welterweight. George was never the biggest welterweight.
He wasn't?
No, I don't think. I mean, he was. I wouldn't say the biggest. I mean, I don't think of him in terms of like.
I always thought he was pretty thick for welterweight. I mean, he would show up to the fights easily 195. I mean, his shoulders, his chest, his legs, and his ass. I mean,
yeah. I mean,
when I think of George, I think of somebody who actually, didn't have death weight cuts.
Right.
But I can't think of a fight right now on the top of my head, right, that George was outsized.
No. I mean, he's a very thick, muscular guy, but I'm just thinking if, especially on fight night, if you saw him matched up against Conor McGregor, I don't know if it would look that out of whack if they were fighting at 170.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and then when George is at 170, the guy is shredded.
Yep.
I think that at 168 that Conor would show up at. I mean, but Conor hits hard. I mean, he has a nice straight left hand. He could possibly catch him, so it isn't a fight to where you sit there and go, well, it's impossible for Conor to win.
Yeah.
Shit. I mean, there's a huge possibility. I mean, Conor's straight left hand, catches anybody and they can go to sleep. So
yeah, well, it's just something to consider down the line. But and of course, there's going to be a lot involved in even getting Conor back into the UFC. He laid down the gauntlet the other day publicly and said he's not back in the UFC without co-promoting. And Dana responded and said, yeah, we'll work that out. I think Dana's that's a foregone conclusion now. He just looks at it and goes, yeah, of course I'm going to have to co-promote with this guy. Let's do it. Let's just get him involved. That's what I'm reading into what Dana's saying, because he sings an entirely different tune than he used to in the past whenever co-promoting was talked about, and rightfully so. I just think that's something to consider for down the line, because one thing Conor McGregor is going to be looking at if he continues to fight in MMA, I think he's going to want to break box office records by not just a little. I don't think it's going to be enough for him in the next few years to just have what would be considered the all-time biggest selling pay-per-views. I think he's going to look to just shatter those records and set a whole new standard. I think he wants,
Well,
I think he wants.
If George fights Woodley, let's say he's successful and beats Woodley, he now becomes a 2-division champion.
Yep.
Could you imagine? I mean, that's one hell of a sell. I mean, the only 2-division champions in the UFC are both actively fighting right now, and they're going to fight each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That might be the biggest pay-per-view of all time.
Yeah. And maybe what if between I mean, we're brainstorming here. I'm just going to get crazy. But what if by the time they fight, you've got 2 fighters and 3 championships between them? What if Conor's still the lightweight champion? What if GSP had the welterweight and the middleweight title, and they fight for the welterweight title?
Yeah.
That's interesting. Somebody's going to, take somebody else's. Well, I guess if Conor won, he would take the welterweight. Anyway, it's just kind of a fun thing to play fantasy matchmaker about. But I think Conor will, if he comes back to MMA, I think he is going to look to have the equivalent of the Mayweather-Pacquiao type, record, the all-time box office record, or now the Mayweather-McGregor pay-per-view record. I think he's going to want something like that. And it just seems like if everything stays on track, if George continues to look like he looked last night, then maybe that is the marquee name that he needs, because Conor he's never had a legendary opponent. I mean, he had a couple of great fights with Nate Diaz.
Oh, Jose Aldo.
But to the more casual fan, yes, certainly a legend. But I'm talking about when you run that trailer on SportsCenter, how do they react to the name of the opponent that he has? You know, I mean, all due respect to Jose Aldo, but I'm just saying back then, if you had run that trailer on Sports Center, that would not have gotten the kind of reaction that I think a future fight, if you ran, you know, Conor McGregor and George St-Pierre side by side, what that would mean to the more casual sports fan.
True.
I just think that that's something that Conor's legacy could really use moving forward if he comes back to MMA.